Hello and welcome once again to The Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We ask that you like, comment, subscribe, share this program. Together, we can push back against that ever-moving liberal agenda. And of course, if you can't listen or watch the program in its entirety right this second, download it, listen to it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, you name it. It is out there because I know you have two friends. They will tell two friends about it. We'll make sure Pierre Poilievre is the next Prime Minister of Canada. A great show lined up for you today. We brought on a few guests in the past. We had Rachel Thomas, we had Kevin Wan. We were talking about censorship, specifically Bill C-11. And we're going to bring on one of the fighters of this bill, this terrible piece of legislation that talks about regulating what you can see, what you can watch on the internet, C-11. We have Senator Leo Housakos from the island of Montreal, the beautiful province of Quebec. Thank you so much for joining us. First time on the show.
Thank you for having me on, MP Schmale. Good to be with you.
That's an oversight on my part. I apologize. All right, C-11. Lots of interest. And we're going to share on our social media as well some of the work you did on committee. You really pushed back. You really brought to light what C-11 is all about. So for the guests joining us for the first time today, what is C-11 and why is it so horrible? Why are people raising alarm bells about it?
In a nutshell, C-11 will determine for Canadians what they can post on their platforms, what they can watch, what they can read. And at the end of the day, in 2022, with all these new digital platforms and technologies that are out there, it's the way of how Canadians communicate, particularly young Canadians like yourself, people younger than my generation.
I appreciate it.
Some of us were used to just sitting in front of that TV box to get our news and to get our information, but today you can get it on Google, you can get it on Twitter, you can get it on YouTube. There's so many platforms out there that have opened up the world to Canadian artists, to Canadian broadcasters, to Canadian freelance reporters, for that matter. And essentially what this bill does, it's an attempt on the part of the Trudeau government to take the old broadcasting system of regulation and determining what you can broadcast, where you can broadcast it, and trying to bring these new platforms into line. And it's just incompatible. It's incompatible to create that alignment. The reality is these new platforms have given Canadians the opportunity to explore, expand, and export our culture around the world. They've created tremendous businesses. There's a number of independent content producers across this country who are selling Canadian content around the world and distributing it around the world at volumes never seen before. And on the other side of the equation, on the left side of the equation, we have the CBC and Bell Media and all these corporations, legacy media, that we love and adore because we put in billions of dollars of taxpayers' money directly into the CBC, into the Canadian Media Fund. And these are organizations that Canadians are just watching at lesser and lesser numbers. Less eyeballs means less revenue. So C-11 right now is trying to put a square into a circle, and it just doesn't work.
I think this is also the very clear divide on how conservatives view the world and some liberals view the world, right? Conservatives like the free market, right? An abundance of choice. Abundance equals peace. People can choose what they like, right? Because what I like as music, what I think is good music, is totally different than what you think is good music. And it's definitely very different than what the government think is good music, right? If the government decides what you see and watch, you get what the government decides. It doesn't matter if you like it or not, right? So the liberals by this bill are picking winners and losers in the marketplace instead of realizing that the world is changing. People are getting their information from different sources because they want a variety of ways they get information. It could be through a podcast like this. It could be another YouTube channel. The world is open right now, and right now the government would see this bill, this piece of legislation, is closing it down.
That's exactly the point. It's a question of consumer choice. And in this country, we've seen that liberalism has brought us to the point where they want us to have less choice. They want a narrow cast. They want you to pay more than ever before. The truth of the matter is Canadians pay more for web connectivity than any other country in the world. And we have in regions of the country where you can't even get good connectivity. And in terms of the broadcasting situation right now, like I said, they essentially want to take a new platform, a new way of doing things that has become prosperous. We've created millions of Canadian success stories that are generating revenue for themselves, for our Canadian coffers, for that matter, even for the Canadian Media Fund. And who benefits is the old legacy platforms who, like I said, are not being successful. And it's ironic that it seems to be not enough. It's almost the liberal Trudeau way of doing things. We're going to pick winners and losers. We're going to have the CRTC and other gatekeepers in Ottawa to determine what platforms are appropriate, what aren't appropriate. And in this bill, let's be clear, the whole challenge here in the debate for us is we have the chairman of the CRTC who came before the Senate Committee on Communications and confirmed that this bill would allow him to manipulate algorithms and to force platforms to manipulate algorithms, which in essence determines what will be pushed up the technological ladder for you and I to watch and what will be pushed down. That is so dangerous from a perspective of privacy, free speech, and, like I said, consumer choice.
So if the CRTC determines what you get to see, or determines something is wrong, that means what tends to happen is anything that criticizes the government then becomes hate speech or something else. And I think that is so concerning to have a bunch of bureaucrats deciding what is available to Canadians. And like you said earlier, like you have entrepreneurs without government permission, without government grants, creating content that others want to see on their own free will.
100%. At the end of the day, we have Canadians producing content. They're downloading it on YouTube. They're putting it out there on various platforms, getting millions of hits that you would not get in our small market. Canada is a small market. We don't have an economy of scale. So we need the world at our feet, and these platforms have provided that. Essentially, the old way of doing things is where Mr. Trudeau wants to stay, is they want through regulation, through the CRTC, through Heritage Canada, to determine these Canadians, they have to go through that little narrow pipeline called the Canadian Media Fund, the Canadian, all the various organizations, gatekeepers, unions, broadcasting corporations that will give them permission to essentially be heard and be seen. At the end of the day, nothing good comes out of narrowing a market of choice. Nothing good. The only thing that comes of it is you get less content, you get to pay exponentially more for it, and you muzzle the creativity of artists in this country and singers and producers and writers. It's just a terrible bill. We have to have confidence in our artists and Canadian culture to punch above our weight and to really be dominant around the world and to use these platforms as we have been. The artistic community, the cultural community in Canada has never been more vibrant than it has in the last decade. And the number one change has been these platforms that have exposed them to the world. So instead of embracing it and allowing it to continue to grow and to prosper, we want to put regulations and laws in order to muzzle them and to allow the traditional gatekeepers, these giants that were created artificially by government laws, to run the show. I think it's wrong. I know that our party thinks it's wrong. We believe in free enterprise. We believe in consumer choice.
If you look at the internet itself, you look at the companies that run it, you have the big ones, telecommunications, you have a few big companies, massive companies, some small ones. We can go into the spectrum auction and all that stuff, which is absolutely incredible how we still do it here. You look at how the Liberals like it. They like a few big players, and that's it. Because I guess if you're in government, it makes sense. It's very easy to deal with 4 or 5 big players in the marketplace, the big corporations, rather than having a whole bunch in a free market, a whole bunch of small players, medium players, making up a whole slew of ideas that anyone can choose from because there is so much abundance.
To that point, what the Liberals love is to have the government master,
yes.
Right? When you have 2 or 3 large giants, those giants have the capacity to afford lobbyists,
That's
to
right.
afford big law firms, to come to Ottawa and to wine and dine and to spread the shrimps and the caviar around in order for them to have influence. Where what we've done on the House side, and now we're carrying that fight over to the Senate side, we're fighting for those independent content producers, those Canadians who have the small business owners who have become successful using these platforms. And I'm tired of this liberal argument. We have these large international conglomerates coming here and benefiting from the marketplace. No, they're offering a platform where their success is incumbent on Canadian content producers and artists and Canadian singers to be successful. So if they're not successful, these platforms aren't successful. It's a happy marriage where these Canadian content producers in the current form have very minimal number of avenues to go and present their case, minimal resources, and the vast majority of those resources are coming at the expense of taxpayers. taxpayers who aren't watching those legacy broadcasters. It's such a simple formula, and Canadians are catching on, and I'm glad to see in the course of our Senate hearings that individual content producers and Canadian users of TikTok and Twitter and Google, and God knows now it's the vast majority, and it's young people. They're starting to realize that we in the Conservative Party are their voice for freedom, for consumer choice. And we will continue to be, because we cannot allow gatekeepers in this town to determine what you watch, what you express, and pay extraordinary amounts of money for it.
Absolutely, and you're talking free market, and you said it perfectly, right? If you're producing content nobody watches in a free market, you either change the way you're doing business or you go out of business, right? But if you're continually getting government subsidies, you are censoring all the other voices trying to make a startup. You really don't have to improve your content all that much. You might make minor tweaks here and there, but in the overall picture of things, the product is not getting better like it would in a true free market system.
And we also live in a world right now where productions of films, for example, documentaries, they cost, in cases, hundreds of millions of dollars to produce. And back to what I said earlier, when it comes to economy of scale, we don't necessarily have the resources to compete on the world level. But what's wrong with international production companies coming to Canada and hiring Canadian writers, Canadian directors, Canadian actors, filming in Canadian centers like Vancouver, Toronto, and some of our rural parts of Canada? And again, we've seen an explosion in the marketplace here in Canada. We're benefiting from a weaker dollar in this particular area. And we're producing Canadian content at massive amounts. But instead of the government, for example, saying to these international investors, come to Canada and we're going to actually open up the ancient CanCon rules in this country.
Were bad, yeah.
Ancient CanCon rules. So to the point, take a Handmaid's Tale, written by an iconic Canadian writer, filmed in Canada, Canadian actors, Canadian directors and producers. Yet the Trudeau government says this isn't Canadian content because some production company who put in the money is a company out of London or a company out of California. So imagine, we're telling foreign investors who believe in Canadian culture, in Canadian artists, don't come and invest here because we're going to make your life a miserable existence. It's ludicrous. We have to open ourselves up to the world, embrace these platforms. It's the Trudeau government picks and chooses when they want to embrace the world and be open. They pick and choose. And it's funny how when it comes to messaging and controlling what we see and watch, controlling propaganda, controlling culture, which is the most dangerous thing in society, they're all for that. They're all in on that. And we need to push back.
As long as they're doing it.
As long as they're doing it, and then they control the levers to get that done.
And you talk about the economic scale of it. You mentioned about the boom that could be happening, that has happened. Even in Northern Ontario, there are some cities that were having trouble figuring out their economic future. And then the movie and television industry came in and completely transformed some of the towns and cities up there. It is absolutely remarkable what has been done. And that's because these companies are seeing the environment that's correct. It allows them to do it. It's financially viable. There's a whole bunch of other pieces to that puzzle. But at the end of the day, if we chase these people away, we chase these producers away, that content never gets done. We don't see that economic impact that happens afterwards. And what do you need after that? Well, another government program to fix the problem that government created in the first place.
Look, I'm a former businessman. I've been in business, so I understand balance sheets. And in the last decade, we've seen an explosion in investment in our artistic film industry, never seen before. And it's been driven by Netflix, by Disney Plus, by all these streaming platforms and corporations around the world, which the Trudeau government is trying to penalize and try to align them with traditional legacy media in this country, which for all intents and purposes is bankrupt. And the problem is the model. So if we can encourage through these streamers and new platforms billions of dollars of investment, and you're absolutely right, the activity, we see it. You go through any town and major city in Canada, you've never seen more film production on site than ever before. Yet we want to go back to the good old days where we were forcing people to watch Canadian content within the confines of our Canadian marketplace. So it makes no sense. We have to open the market, deregulate the market, allow for more streaming, allow for more platform and more content producers in this country so we can export and continue to benefit from the reach
Let's
of this
export
platform.
Canadian content.
100%, which we've been doing.
Yes, and we should do more of that.
And by the way, we've seen also a spike in our tourist industry, even pre-COVID and now post-COVID, like never seen before. And in large part, if you talk to people in the tourist industry, because of our presence on these platforms, people around the world are discovering what Canada's all about, what small towns are all about, what our Rockies are all about, what small regions of the country that otherwise weren't covered by the Radio Canada International or CBC or Canadian Film Board. They're exposing the beauty of Canada, and we've seen a spike, which has helped our economy, our hospitality industry, our travel industry, and so on and so forth.
Theoretically, if this bill becomes law, so it's second reading in the Senate, we're going to third reading at some point, we're not sure when, I'm assuming. If it does pass, how soon, I don't know if this question has come up, how soon could we start to see the ramifications of this bill, noticing that content that we used to watch or listen to isn't popping up as much as it used to? Is it going to take a few months after that? Is there any indication?
The good news is there's a few steps here. We're in committee right now with the bill in the Senate. It's probably going to get through clause by clause by the end of this month and get to third reading in the Senate chamber. We hope that we can be successful in passing a number of amendments and trying to mitigate the dangerous elements of this bill. After that, there has to be public hearings with the CRTC in order to put in place the regulatory framework of this bill, which is very important. So my call to citizens who are watching us is get out there and write and call and speak to your senators, particularly those that are sitting on the Senate committee and will have a say on this on third reading. Let them know how concerned you are. Also, when the public hearings come around in 2023, because this bill invariably will pass, the Senate is there to make amendments, to make suggestions. By no means do we think as an appointed body we have the right to defeat legislation, even though if there was a piece of legislation that deserves to be defeated, it's this one. We feel that we will make some amendments, but when it gets to the CRTC, we need to also make sure that the Canadian voices are heard. And ultimately, sometime between now and the next 18 months, when there's a federal election, make sure you go and you cast ballots for members of Parliament who believe in freedom, who believe in consumer choice. And I know, Jamie Schmale, you're one of those candidates and a strong advocate. I've seen you at National Caucus of the Conservative Party stand up with tremendous energy for those values and principles. And we both know that a government led by Pierre Poilievre will never waver when it comes to freedom of speech and consumer choice.
Absolutely.
So these are the steps, and that last one is the most important. Let's have a change in government that will safeguard our traditional freedoms and freedom of speech.
I love how you said that. I usually give the guests the floor to end the program. I don't know how you're going to beat that ending, but if you want, the floor is yours for closing remarks.
Look, thank you for inviting me and having me on, and thank you for the work you do in the House of Commons. At the end of the day, in the Senate, we're just an additional body to help push along the work of the House of Commons. And thank you for the work you do as a candidate in your region of the country. You're one of our strong voices, and I'm so excited about what's around the corner. I think Canadians are finally starting to realize that you can't have Ottawa dictate your everyday life and choose for you what you watch, what you post, how much taxes you pay, what you can buy, what you can't buy. We've seen in this city and in this government, they spend more, they hire more bureaucrats, and they give Canadian citizens less. Makes no sense.
I think out of this economic recovery, the last article I saw, 9 out of 10 jobs recovered went to government.
That's
so
right.
It shows you the size and scope, the depth and breadth is what is happening at the government scale. Senator Leo Housakos, Island of Montreal, Province of Quebec, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your time as well. New content every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please remember, like, comment, subscribe, share this program. We do appreciate your time. And until next Tuesday, we say low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.